Hello, everyone. Thank you so much. And now we're going to start with I know that it's so great to be back in person, that people are having so much fun connecting with their colleagues. It's wonderful. This is what we missed during the pandemic. So thank you so much for coming back. We have a plenary session right now. But Nicole Scanello is our moderator, and I wanted to introduce her first officially. Nicole Scanello is the Assistant Division Chief for Communications in the American Community Survey Office, or ACSO, overseeing survey respondent and data user outreach and education for the American Community Survey. Nicole provides leadership and guidance for a wide range of operations designed to support data users and respondents, including presentations, correspondence, technical webinars, documentation, the ACS website, and educational and promotional materials. Nicole has over 20 years of experience at the Census Bureau and has held several roles over the years. Nicole has a bachelor's degree in sociology and a master's degree in sociology, both from the University of Virginia. And now I turn it over to Nicole.
Thank you, Diana. Can you all hear me? I am only about 4 inches taller than this podium, so I'll do my best. So good morning, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here today to moderate this plenary session. We have a great panel here to discuss strategies to improve ACS data quality. Quality is at the heart of what we do with the Census Bureau. Our mission is to be the leading provider of quality data about our nation's people, places, and economy. Not just a provider of data, a provider of quality data. As we heard from Director Santos this morning, the Census Bureau is reinventing the statistical system and transforming to leverage new technologies, new methods, and new data sources. Donna Daly noted that the ACS program is also transforming by using administrative records to optimize operations in response to declining response rates, increasing costs, and data collection challenges. All of this work shares a common theme, and that is to help us achieve that mission of providing quality data. In this session, we will hear more about these transformative and innovative efforts from 2 Census Bureau speakers, and we'll cap off the session with key insights from the data user's perspective. First, we'll hear from Dr. Sally Ann Keller, who will talk about evolving the data enterprise to support relevant, timely, and equitable statistical products. Dr. Keller is Chief Scientist and Associate Director of the Census Bureau's Research and Methodology Directorate. She is also an elected member of the U.S. National Academy of Engineering, a fellow of the American Association for the Advancement of Science, an elected member of the International Statistics Institute, and a fellow and past president of the American Statistical Association. Dr. Keller is a nationally recognized research scientist whose areas of expertise are social and decision informatics, statistical underpinnings of data science, data access and confidentiality, and as a leading voice in creating the science of all data and advancing this research across disciplines to benefit society. Then we will hear from Elizabeth Poehler, or Eli as she is known, who will discuss using administrative data in the American Community Survey. Eli is the Assistant Division Chief for Survey Methods for the American Community Survey. In this role, she oversees experiments for the survey as well as administrative records research. Eli has worked on the ACS since 2015 and has been with the Census Bureau for nearly 25 years. And finally, we will hear from Amy O'Hara, who will discuss the intersection of the various challenges to ACS data quality and provide suggestions on how data users and the Census Bureau might think about these challenges moving forward. Amy is a research professor in the Massive Data Institute at Georgetown's McCourt School of Public Policy. She works on data governance, data linkage, and privacy preserving technologies. And with that, I will hand it over to Dr. Keller.
Nicole, thank you for the introductions and welcome everybody. What a pleasure to be here with you today. But put your seatbelts on because I'm going to take you on a fast journey to see and understand a little bit of what we're doing around transformation, and then ask you to help imagine and help think about how the ACS fits into this important direction. So there are many forces driving innovation today, and this quote from our Deputy Director really captures what the future is that we need to embrace. That as we advance into the 21st century, we are experiencing increased demand for our data, struggling with challenges to traditional data collection methods, and exploring rich new data sources and tools that can revolutionize what we do and how we do it. Our success critically depends on our ability to seize the opportunities in front of us to deliver statistical products that address the increasingly complex and diverse needs of our users, you. So that's the journey that we're on. And so let me talk to you a little bit about that. What does that mean? Like Director Santos mentioned this morning, it means that we at the Bureau need to flip our focus, and we need to think carefully and engage with our stakeholders to understand what objectives that they need our data to support. And then once we understand that, we can begin to shape statistical products to meet those needs. We call this a statistical first approach. It's really having the end in mind and then thinking about what are the statistical products that we need to be developing to help meet those end user goals. And then we can drive all of our data assets into these statistical products. And that includes the ACS and our survey products and all kinds of other data sources. Well, why are we doing this? Why are we thinking about this? Well, we need to focus on purpose and use. And as Donna Daly mentioned earlier, every question on the ACS has a reason for being there, has a specific purpose or use. And that's really important. And that's true with all of our survey and census instruments. However, today, the purpose and uses that our data need to support span more than a single question, more than a single data collection, more than a single data acquisition. These are things like climate extremes, broadband deployment, understanding tribal areas. We just heard about the wonderful data release that's coming out that will help there. Well, can we blend that with other information to gain a deeper understanding? The gig economy, the unhoused, migration, the differential undercount, commuting patterns, counting children, local businesses, equity and inclusion, and something that would seem simple, grant applications, but it's not. And I'll talk more about that specific purpose and use in a minute. Well, here's the journey that I want you to join us on. And it is a continuous journey. It starts with the elicitation of purpose and use from our data users, from user groups like you. And then once we understand some of those purpose and uses, it's to look at all of our existing data assets and to leverage all of those in the development and the beginning developments of statistical products. And then let that understanding show us what the gaps are that will then drive more data collection and acquisition, more integration of model-based methods and estimates into ultimately products that will disseminate, and the dissemination will take on many modalities over and above what we've done in the past. Let's take a couple examples really quick. So this first example, because it's not like the Bureau hasn't done this in the past, this is what I should start off saying, we have, but we want this to be the rule, not the exception in the work that we do. So here's an example. During COVID, there was a lot of interest on understanding the mental health status of everyone. So the Bureau took a look at what do we have to help answer that question. And what we had was the National Health Interview Survey from 2019, which had several questions on it that related to mental health. But looking at that, we realized that this particular survey is based on a 12-month reference period. And so that wasn't quite good enough for the question that was being asked. So we looked and we were just beginning the Household Pulse survey, and it turns out that the National Center for Health Statistics were able to put some questions on the Household Pulse survey. It's capturing a 4-week reference period. And these questions were some of the mirror images of, or some of the same questions that were on the National Health Interview Survey. Then we had the opportunity to bring these two data sources together through some model-based approaches that would provide a much more complete picture of mental health than either source alone, and also tell us much more about coverage, both differential coverage and differences in reporting modes. But the story doesn't end there. I told you this was a continuous journey. And now we're looking forward to the forthcoming household panel that will enable similar statistical products to be developed on a rapid cadence. And it will be supported by many of our surveys It'll be supported by administrative records and other data sources, and also a framework for model-based estimation that can blend and bring all of these sources together. Okay, that was pretty fun. But now let's look at an example where ACS plays a central role, because this is the ACS Data Users Conference. You all know, or I hope you all know, that we have released the Community Resilience Estimates. That is an experimental product and has a lot of different estimates in it that help understand communities' ability to absorb and respond to different kinds of crises and disasters. Well, in this particular case, recently, we have just released a heat indicator. And this came about when we were contacted by Arizona State University's Knowledge Exchange for Resilience. And they wondered if there was some way to leverage the CRE estimates to understand vulnerability to extreme heat. So we took a look, and the CREs are blended model-based estimates that take ACS data together with our population estimates program data. And so we took a look at that, and what we realized is that, in fact, we really didn't have a direct measure that would be related to vulnerability due to extreme heat. And so, working together with Arizona State University, we identified that there were some indicators, risk indicators, that were related here, 3 in particular: housing structure type, commute type, and whether household costs are greater than 50%. And then we were able to put those together to actually then produce a CRE for heat. And again, that's just been released in the recent weeks. And it helps communities understand where the vulnerabilities might be should they be confronted with extreme events. Now, again, it's a continuous journey. We're not going to stop here. The CRE will continue to inspire new statistical products as we interact with our user groups and identify what some of those needs are. It will also be able to address in the future different things like custom defined geographies, something I know that probably every person in this room has been confronted with. And it will also ultimately, be able to include some other environmental data that will give us a sense of where we might expect some of these different disasters and things to happen. So those are a couple examples to show you how this journey that we're on, and hopefully that you'll join us on, works. But now let's just look into the parts just a little bit. So it's really important that we think about our stakeholders and our data users and how to illuminate this ecosystem of data users and elicit from the data users purpose and use and elicit their help in the development of these products. Thursday morning, Stephanie Shipp, who's in the back here, will be leading a session to do some elicitation from all of you, which will be really fun. That needs to be done in an equitable way, and it really needs to be done in a rapid way. Otherwise, this whole journey will fail. We also have the opportunity to leverage our very rich data infrastructure. That includes all of our data assets that you heard the director talk about, you heard Donna talk about, you will hear the other speakers talk about, so I won't belabor this one, but this goes well beyond our survey data, of which the ACS is just one of the foundational and fundamental pieces, but now we get to put more things with it. We have a very strong program in the Bureau on record linkage and have for years, and that's partly thanks to Amy O'Hara, one of our speakers, that we are able to effectively link together people, places, jobs, and organizations. This provides a really rich foundation for building our statistical products. And every day, our research in record linkage grows, and we just get better and better and faster at this. We also have to adhere to legal frameworks and data governance. Now, many people think, oh my gosh, that's just so overbearing. That's just going to shut everything down. It's going to prevent us from doing all kinds of things. When in fact, it helps us, particularly on this journey. Title 13 directs us to do what I'm talking about, to acquire data for statistical purposes. The Foundations for Evidence Policy Act promotes data sharing. And then the Confidential Information Protection and Statistical Efficiency Act protects us through the separation of statistical purpose from administrative purpose of the data. So this really helps us and provides us some strength to take this journey. And in the spirit of the Census Bureau, it also helps strengthen our ethical data stewardship, which is at the ethos of what we do. It also illuminates for us new challenges in disclosure avoidance, that we now have a triple trade of privacy accuracy, which we've had for a long time, and now availability, which is the volume and amount of statistics that we produce. We have a session later this afternoon that'll get to the heart of these issues. And then finally, dissemination, which is so exciting here for me when I started to think about this and realize that the Bureau does sort of two things. On the one hand, we produce statistical products, public use products. On the other end, we allow people access to our confidential microdata. There is a huge space in between where we now have the opportunity to start developing things like tiered access, invoke privacy enhancing technologies in different ways to help us disseminate things, engage AI platforms to be the uptake for some of our data. We sum this up in what we call a curated data enterprise. And the use of the word curation is deliberate here, because what I've just described to you will only help us become agile and fast in the developing of statistical products and the engagement with our users and our subject matter experts if we curate everything along the way that we do, so that we can go back and reuse it, we can find it, we can understand it, and we can apply it. As Director Santos mentioned, we have been building technologies for a few years now to help enable this transformation. And it starts with our data ingest and collection for the enterprise system called DICE. That's the front door where all of our data assets have to go through to get into the Bureau. Curation starts at that stage, as well as all of the documentation around data use agreements and data governance. All of that flows into our enterprise data lake, which is a cloud-based data processing, computing, and management system. That's where we're going to do both all of our data warehousing as well as the development of our statistical products. This will be supported in the lake by our frames, which is linking together our geo math tiger information with our business register, with our jobs frame, and our new demo frame, which is our people frame. Now that we can link these things, and as we're linking all these together, it forms like a coordinate system for organization of how we're going to then bring all these other data assets together to develop these products. And then we get out of the lake, leave the beachfront through our data dissemination processes. We started in the fall, as again, Director Santos mentioned, a project to really formalize all of this. It has three parts, not surprising: data user engagement, product development, and dissemination. Here's our wonderful team, and you will recognize some of these faces that are bringing this project together. Erica Becker-Medina, Nate Ramsey. Nate also is the director of our FSRD, our Federal Statistics Research and Development Centers. When I'm here another 6 months, I will get that acronym to come out right. And Emily Malfino, who works on the dissemination side and is also one of my special assistants. On the user engagement side, I'm just going to run through our current activities really quick here. The user engagement side, we've had a lot of engagements such as this, and such as what you'll do on Thursday, where we're listening. And what we're hearing is provide a feedback loop. Quit asking us only, provide a feedback loop. And so hopefully we will be doing that. We also are having an internal workshop at the Bureau, actually a series of activities for all of the different organizations within the Bureau that do stakeholder outreach, to try to understand how that goes, what gaps there might be, how effective what effective processes do we already have in place that can elicit purpose and use. And then one of the things that we heard from our State Data Center Executive Committee in the recent time is that we also should pay attention to the fact that a lot of others like you, data users, are out there building wonderful products, building wonderful dashboards, supporting users, and we should be familiar with that, because our job should be to fill the gaps and not to be duplicative and redundant with what else is going on. So we're taking a look first at the state data centers, and we'll catalog what we find that's going on there. On the product development side, this is really exciting. Just last week, we launched a pilot, and our first pilot, and this pilot is focused at grant applications for state, local governments and NGOs. So what we're doing is that we're using data science techniques to parse through the vast number of grant applications that are out there from the government, from the federal government. And we're looking for what data elements are they asking for? Because what we would like to do is to be able to build some tools and some access models that would really ease the burden of local governments as they're trying to fulfill their data calls for grant applications. You know, if you are a large municipality, you might have a team of data scientists or statisticians on board that can help you. If you're a small rural area, you might be able to reach out to a regional university and get help to get that. But the last thing that local governments need to do, particularly those across our rural America, is to try to wade through census.data.gov for this information. There has to be a better way. And so that's our pilot, and we will report back on that. And then finally, on the dissemination front, this is really exciting. We're working with OpenAI and the Department of Commerce Chief Data Officer to figure out how we can be delivering our data and our statistics in a way that AI platforms will absorb them. Our Chief Data Officer is Zach Whitman at the Bureau, so this is something that he's heading up. And what we're trying to do is to understand, how do people ask for our information? And finally, then, how do we actually embed the right metadata and other information into the cells of our table, into our ACS table cells, so this data actually gets picked up? So when somebody asks, how many poor folks in DC, that links back to our poverty table from the ACS for the District of Columbia. And if any of you, and I know all of you in this room, have used ACS tables, just think about how we name them. And think about how we name all the columns in them and all the variables in them. Kind of reminds you of the Dewey Decimal System. Not very helpful when AI platforms are based on language, how we speak. So that's our exciting project there. Again, we'll report back. And with that, I want you to imagine the art of the possible and commit to joining us on this journey. ACS is central to this. Thank you. Yeah, no, I am.
Good morning, everyone.
Morning.
Thank you, Sally. So this morning, I'm going to be talking about how the ACS is using administrative data. But first, let's talk about why. As Director Santos mentioned, the public is increasingly pushing back on responding to surveys, including the ACS. This increases concerns about the potential for non-response bias in our data, which is when those who don't respond to the survey have different characteristics than those who do respond. Title 13 also requires that we consider data already available before collecting it from the public. By using administrative data, we reduce burden on the public and continue to produce high quality data. So also to make sure we're on the same page, whenever I talk about administrative data or AdRec or AR, I'm talking about data from all kinds of sources. Data can be from federal agencies, state and local governments, or even commercial entities. These sources may maintain data for the purpose of administering programs, providing services to the public, or for business use. There are many ways that administrative data can be used in the ACS. Data can be used throughout the survey lifecycle in various ways and to various degrees. We can use administrative data to inform and optimize operations. For example, the Census Bureau has been using administrative data to identify phone numbers associated with sample addresses for a long time. We may not always think of this as administrative data, but it is. When it comes to the questions and topics on the ACS, we can use administrative data across a spectrum of uses. We could completely remove a question from the survey and produce data solely from administrative data sources. We can skip the question when we have sufficient data and ask it when we don't. We can use administrative data to replace invalid response data or missing data. We can use administrative data directly as we see it in the administrative data, or we can model it. We can use administrative data to monitor quality of responses we receive, adjust weighting methods, and create new and more robust data products, as Sally mentioned. On Thursday, my colleague Sandy Clark will be discussing our general approach to using administrative data. how we decide how to use the administrative data in the survey lifecycle, and if we should move forward with implementation. This morning, I'm going to talk about some specific projects we're currently implementing to use administrative data. First, I'll talk about 3 projects we have underway to optimize operations. Then I'll talk about 2 projects we're pursuing to fully or partially replace questions on the ACS. So first, how we're using ACS, or how we're using administrative data to optimize operations. The ACS CAPI operation is our non-response follow-up for people who don't self-respond to the survey. In-person and telephone interviewing are conducted during CAPI. CAPI interviewing makes up more than half of the ACS program costs, and the operation becomes more expensive every year. This can be attributed to sharp increases in wages and overhead costs, everything from gas to paper. We're also seeing a decrease in respondent cooperation that results in more visits to convince someone to participate, and therefore time spent per case to obtain a survey response. To offset the increased data collection costs last year in 2022, we used 2 methods to control costs. We reduced the CAPI workload and began reducing the time interviewers were allowed to conduct interviews. Most of the year, the CAPI operation was conducted as usual. In April, however, we began reducing the workload by several thousand cases nationwide. In August, fearing cost overruns, we drastically reduced the CAPI sample by almost half. After successfully reducing costs in August, we were able to increase the CAPI sample again in September. And again, on the reducing the time allowed, most of the year interviewers had up to a month to conduct interviews. In July, however, in addition to workload reductions, we began to reduce the interviewing period, which ranged from stopping interviewing 2 days early to 2 weeks early. While we were striving to do the best we could with the situation, we realized the solution was not ideal. In a perfect world, for optimum data quality, the data collection budget would increase as costs increase. However, we don't live in that world. Declining response rates and rising costs of data collection are only 2 among a long list of reasons that the Census Bureau is relying more and more on administrative data to optimize our operations. 3 projects are underway this year to optimize our data collection activities during CAPI: prioritizing contacts by geographic areas, predicting vacancy status, and adapting contact efforts. All of the projects use survey paradata and administrative data to inform the decisions we make to either reduce or stop CAPI interview attempts. The first project, the Prioritizing Contact by Geographic Area project, is the first step in taking a data-driven approach to reducing the CAPI workload. Instead of closing CAPI operations for an entire region, as was done in 2022, we identified counties where we can decrease the length of the interview period in a way that tries to minimize the impact on data quality. We identified the counties based on data analysis of response rates in the region, administrative data, and similarities in respondent demographic characteristics between self-responders and CAPI responders in the region. For counties where self-responders and CAPI responders have very similar demographic and socioeconomic characteristics, we are cutting the interview period by 2 weeks, so that census interviewers can spend the rest of the month on cases that will lead to the most representative estimates. This process began in January of this year. The next project is the Predicting Vacancy Status project. In this project, we created a model to predict the vacancy status of a unit using the same modeling approach that was used successfully to predict vacancy status for households during the 2020 census, but adapting that model for the ACS. The model predicts which housing units have a high probability of being vacant using data from the US Postal Service, like when mail is undeliverable, delivery status on the master address file, and data from the IRS, Medicare, and others. Since 2020, as a cost-saving measure, interviewers have been instructed to contact CAPI cases by phone first. However, for cases expected to be vacant, a phone call is not likely to be very productive. So beginning in April of this year, for housing units with the top 3% probability of being vacant, We instruct interviewers to do a personal visit as the initial contact. If no one answers the door, interviewers look for other indications that a sampled housing unit is vacant, such as a sale or rental sign. If the interviewer believes the unit is vacant, they can talk to a neighbor, management office, or call a realtor to confirm the vacancy status and collect additional information about that housing unit. So even for vacant units, we collect things like when the unit was built, how many rooms are in the house, and whether it's for sale or a seasonal home. Doing a personal visit first on these types of cases will allow us to more quickly identify vacant units or get a response if the unit is actually occupied. Identifying vacant sooner will free up more time to work cases and hopefully obtain responses on units that are more likely to be occupied. The interviewers know to do a personal visit by looking at their case assignment. These personal visit first messages are displayed for the potentially vacant units, but also for addresses that were unmailable and undeliverable during the self-response phase of data collection. This means that interviewers don't know that the unit may be vacant so as not to influence their behavior. There are no other changes to how the interviewer proceeds with data collection for these housing units, just that they start with a personal visit. In addition to instructing interviewers to conduct a personal visit first, we are also using the vacant model to identify cases to curtail interview attempts. Every time an interviewer contacts a household or attempts an interview, they are required to record that attempt. Every day, we look at that contact data, which is also known as paradata, to see how many attempts they have made for a case and the outcomes of those attempts. After 2 attempts have been made, we will remove the likely vacant cases in the top 1% of probabilities from the interviewer's workloads, and no more attempts will be made. This is a conservative approach to stopping work. Most vacant housing units are resolved in 2 visits normally. Also, focusing on the top 1% of vacant probabilities allows us to be a little more conservative for the likely vacant cases that we consider stopping interviewing efforts, though these rules may change over time. The third project to optimize CAPI workload is the adapting contact efforts. This project is in development and is expected to roll out this summer. This project complements the vacant prediction project because it focuses on likely occupied units. That is, it excludes the likely vacant addresses identified in the top 1% that we just talked about. The adapting contact models identify cases to stop on a case-by-case basis compared to stopping cases in an entire geographic area like the first project we talked about. We've not yet decided whether to integrate this approach in addition to stopping work at the geographic levels because we're still investigating the overlap of the 2 methods, but we'll have flexibility to use one or both methods as we move forward. This project borrows from models and strategies that have been used in other surveys, including the Survey of Program Participation, the National Survey of College Graduates, the National Survey of Family Growth, and a labor force survey conducted by Statistics Netherlands. Implementation in these surveys has demonstrated effort reduction and cost reduction benefits, so we know this can work. The adapting contact efforts in CAPI works on looking at 3 models. The first case level response propensity models are generated primarily from accumulated paradata. These models can be run through the CAPI data collection period to understand which cases are more or less likely to respond at any given point in time. The quality model looks at responding and non-responding housing unit characteristics, which will obtain from administrative records data. And case level data collection cost models are generated from accumulated paradata and cost data. These models will be looked at in conjunction to identify cases that have a low propensity to respond to additional contact attempts and have characteristics similar to people who have already responded. This allows us to reduce data collection costs and minimize the impact to non-response bias. Cost data will be used to help determine the number of cases to stop based on budget constraints. We will implement stop work on the cases identified by the modules around day 15 of the interview period. This means all CAPI cases will be contacted and have a chance to respond before we reduce contact efforts. All right, now moving on to efforts for a question replacement. I have two examples for you this morning of what we're working on. The first is related to the acreage question on the survey. The acreage question asks respondents how many acres their housing unit is on. Many respondents don't know this answer and either look it up, guess, or round their answer. Acreage data is available in many localities' property tax records. Acreage can also be calculated from parcel boundary data. The Census Bureau evaluated acreage data at a case level from administrative record sources and compared it against historical ACS response data. The data was summarized at the county level to make a determination about the quality of the administrative records data. In counties where data were deemed high quality, we will not ask the acreage question if the acreage data is available for the sampled housing unit. This applies to our automated instruments, Internet and CAPI. If the data is not available for the sampled housing unit, or the sampled housing unit is in a county with overall low quality administrative data, we're going to ask the acreage question. For paper forms, it's not operationally feasible to do this, so all paper questionnaires will ask the acreage question. We will evaluate the responses on the back end to determine if we will use respondent provided data or administrative records. This results in treating all modes the same. This will take effect in the 2024 ACS data collection year. Another question we're considering replacing is the agricultural sales question. The data from this question is used by the Bureau of Economic Analysis as a proxy to identify housing units on farms. Instead of looking for administrative data on agricultural sales, though, we're looking at data to help identify farms, such as IRS tax data and crop layer data. We will soon begin using this data to simulate estimates in a joint effort with BEA and expect research findings this winter. After we evaluate the simulation, we will make a recommendation for the potential removal of the question. The earliest this question would be removed from the questionnaire is in 2025 and will include a period of public comment prior to making a final decision. In addition to the 5 projects I described this morning, we're continuing to work on applying administrative records in various ways for other ACS topics spanning the survey lifecycle. We're exploring partial replacement for questions on property value, property tax, and year built. We're looking at to use administrative data to edit or impute data on sex, age, place of birth, citizenship, and income. And we're looking at enhancing ACS data products or producing experimental data products for income. The Census Bureau has shared a shared goal with our data users of high quality statistical products. The Census Bureau also has a responsibility to the public to use existing data before burdening the public with requests for information. We are committed to working with the public and our data user community to balance these demands. We believe that the use of administrative data can enhance survey operations and the products we produce. Thank you.
All right. Now to talk about what they are doing, I want to first talk about the theme, the triple constraint. The Bureau is producing the ACS subject to constraints on cost, time, and scope. The good news for all of us is that they seem, didn't want to show you the one with the flames yet, but now you know where we're going. So the good news is that the Bureau is usually holding time invariant. This is great. That means that you can get the data that you rely on a planned schedule. So that is good news. But as you just heard Eli talk about, that cost one is really tricky because their cost is responding to government forces and societal response patterns. It's not responding to market forces, because if the ACS cost was responding to market forces, those of us that use it would be like, this is invaluable. I need this for planning. I need this for research. I need this to deliver services, but that's not how it is. So they have a fixed cost, and that's a bit troubling. And then scope. Scope here is really kind of that final frontier. And that's what we heard about today, the changes that could be coming to the products, to the way the survey is being done. Now, I want to flip this into something where we talk about more tensions from the data user perspective, because data users are demanding more disaggregated information. They want more detail. They want to know slices and dices of the data. And the Bureau is pushing back and saying, wait a minute, we are bound by Title 13 to produce safe data products. And so there's a lot of tension there. And now I've changed it from time to timely, because we can hear about these changes that are potentially happening to the survey, and we have to expect that we're going to get those products on the same schedule that we have grown accustomed to. So whenever we think about what the Bureau is saying in terms of those safe statistics, they're kind of balking at the volume of numbers that they are pushing out the door. They do publish a lot of information, and they're viewing that as a bit of private information leaking. And so you hear about things like formal privacy or changes to the disclosure avoidance systems that they're using to protect the data. But that's something that really is a tension as the ACS is evolving, for people saying more, and the Bureau saying, but it has to be safe, it has to be safe. So I would add another dimension to this, which is the dimension of transparency. So I've taken my triangle and I've pulled it up into 3 dimensions with my pin for transparency. And so with my great RA, Audrey McIntyre, I've been going through exhaustively the ACS research and documentation. And it's an interesting mix of white papers and FCSM papers and talks at conferences like this, at joint statistical meetings, occasionally a journal article. And it's kind of hard to follow what methods are really in play. And both Sally and Eli have mentioned modeling. But to a lot of people in the user community, they're like, what do you mean by that? What is that going to do? And is this just a different recipe for sausage making? How is that going to affect the sausage that comes out of this factory? So there are a lot of questions about how you can make the potential changes to the ACS much more transparent and accessible to, especially to user communities, including the policymakers that are ultimately taking the data and just plugging it in. So I think about 3 broad categories for how the Bureau is considering changes to the ACS. And the first one is design. And so as I am trying to represent this user community here, they want more. They want new content. They want new content added to the questionnaire or added through whatever means are viable and possible. They want much more detailed categories than the Bureau has been collecting. And that is, again, in tension with that privacy issue that the Bureau has, but they also want more accuracy. And I believe that users, many users, want all of these things. But sometimes the Bureau hears about users that kind of ignore the margins of error, and they're just using the ACS and picking up the number and plugging it in. And the Bureau's like, that is to their detriment. They're not paying attention to what the ACS really is. Okay, that's true. That's a problem. You've got to do more engagement and more education. But there are a lot of data users that care about all of these. And they think that there is a way that you can approach the coming changes to the ACS and achieve gains here. And from the 2 previous speakers, they've already hit on some of these items. This could happen through changes to the sample, to the survey content, to the way that data are collected. And that includes by using administrative data through item and unit imputation, which could factor into what the Bureau counts as a response whenever quality administrative data are available, and ultimately how they're doing weighting. And you really saw how the Bureau is poised to move forward during 2020, whenever they radically changed the way that they had to weight the products. And that was just it's a sign of good faith that they were able and ready to take all of the administrative data that are in the agency and say, okay, how are we going to make this data usable for the public? So I don't think that we should lose sight of where there have been these marked innovations in the products. Next, I want to talk about administrative data. And I chose my icons here because there are a lot of people that think that administrative data are potentially going to destroy census products or the ACS in particular. That's because people worry about administrative data having incomplete coverage, and they do. and administrative data having these uncertainties involving cost and access, because they do. That administrative data could be volatile. And even in the best of cases, this can happen. Like when you look at IRS implementing transfers through the tax system, whenever there's an economic stimulus rebate, you end up with 10 million more people in the tax system than you had the year before. But that's not likely to be sustained because government isn't going to keep giving people money through the tax system. So volatility for administrative data is another issue. And then accuracy. What is it capturing? What was it collected for? How can you possibly use this? And the sad thing is that administrative data can be really useful for all of the things that I have in this list here. And Eli's already talked about this for optimizing response. You're using it through adaptive design. How do you get the field costs back to my original triangle without the flames? How do you deal with these cost constraints that you face? You could use administrative data. You might be getting better quality than responses. We heard that already today too, that the administrative data in the 2020 were better than the proxies, perhaps unsurprisingly. How is that going to play out whenever you look at the amount of rising item non-response in the ACS and where you do have administrative data that could at least reduce part of that problem for you? Something that you don't really hear that much about is how you could use administrative data to introduce new data elements without respondent burden. And I think that's because my original triangle that had cost, scope, and time there, that's one that they have to solve. And so adding new things, it's like, can I have new free things? No, you can't have new free things. We already have these cost troubles, but there has to be a way to work with partners. And I was encouraged to hear Sally say that the folks at Arizona State came along and said, you should be able to incorporate extreme heat. That's great. How do you come up with the dialogue, that window where other partners can come up to the window and say, you know what else I think you could do? Or you know what else is out there? You know what administrative data are doing well that would be great to join to the survey? And even if you're not doing it at the person level, perhaps you could be doing it at some area level. And the Bureau has been great at taking lots of data sources that they have in hand and repackaging them into new products like the community resilience estimates. And that's mainly using Title 13 data right now. I would love to see that enhanced by the use of administrative data. So how do you take what you're doing and augment it with administrative data? And these last two here, the improved item imputation, improved weighting, that should be the low hanging fruit. You already know how to do this. You have presented this at FCSM, at JSM, you've published on this. Do more of that, right? Because it is only in that way that I think you are going to be able to diffuse the public sentiment about administrative data. And that should be your challenge. It shouldn't be like, how do we take something like, and no offense, but like acreage, agricultural products? People use income. Like there's been a ton of research on income. There's a great census paper and a program in their demographic programs area of a data product called News, where they've really gone deep and they have articulated all the ways that the survey income is not very good and how you could look at that compared to administrative data. And back when I worked at the Bureau, I used to say that administrative data weren't a gold standard, but they are both small t truths. Here's the information from the survey. Here's the information from administrative data. You're smart people, figure it out. Show us how you can improve the data that the users are going to have through better item imputation, and then ultimately weighting whenever you are facing these unit non-response problems. It's my rant on administrative, which leads me to a discussion of privacy, which I like almost as much. Because this is where there's this inherent tension between what users want, more data, accurate data now, and what the Bureau is saying, like, no, we must be doing new and different things because we must make sure that people are not going to be singled out, as they say in the GDPR, from having too much information leaking out through these statistical products. So this is a legitimate tension, right? And Sally was just talking about this new approach called statistical product first. And the good news is that that is putting privacy in from the very beginning. She is baking the cake with privacy in there as one of the key ingredients, and that's good stuff. But we also heard that the Bureau is really working on these new products, but they might have different inputs. And that is something back to my pin for that third dimension with transparency. when you tell people that we're still going to give you the same thing, but we're making it with a different recipe, it's kind of like the new Coke for anybody old enough to remember that. You know, it's like, what did you do? This doesn't taste right. And you don't want to wait until people are sitting there drinking the new Coke to be like, we test this adequately. So it's figuring out whenever the Bureau is talking about changes that they are making due to these sensitivities and how that's going to impact the products. You don't want to have kind of the fact finding for, is this an adequate fix after you have released the product? And so it's really encouraging to hear all of our speakers today, Rob and Donna and everybody on this panel, saying engagement is really, really important. But when you hear that, I want you to think of this from the user perspective. Turn your ears on. You might get less data than you're getting right now, okay? And you might get different data than you're getting right now. You might get better data than you're getting right now. But all in all, it is better than no data. So be valid partners with the Bureau whenever they are looking into all of these potential changes, be it of the survey design, deeper use of administrative data, or changing the products that we have all grown to know and love. You might not get them. You might get different ones. And that is going to have some strife because you're going to be like, I want what I had before, but sometimes you can't have what you had before. Sometimes what you're going to get in the future is actually going to potentially provide more information, more of this rich information. But this is where I think it gets kind of uncomfortable because when you're talking about these changes, they're really unsatisfactory unless there has been discussion and preparation. When is this going to hit us? And it was great when the Bureau came out with that news in December of last year, like, cool your jets, people, we're not going to change the ACS in 2024 or 25. But it kind of leaves the rest of us going, well, when are you going to change it? When's that going to happen? Like, I want to know that. So there is this dialogue that has to occur. And it's also the problem with privacy, to me, is that it's this weird messaging because the Bureau gets out there and says, please respond in full. Your responses matter. This is you. This is how we see you. This is how we make sure that you are part of this richness in our society. But then the Bureau is like, well, now that we collected it, we're only able to release this amount or this amount. And that leaves a lot of users very unsatisfied. They're like, wait a minute. I went to my people and I told them that this is really important. This is how we are going to be seen. But then you face this tension with the Bureau saying, but under the current law, Title 13 of the US Code, we can't put it all out there. So it's that question about, well, what can you put out there? How do you have statistical treatments in order to protect it? But then you need to make sure that that is being clearly communicated to people so that they are not caught off guard or feel betrayed in providing that information in the first place. So these are my pictures of silos, which I think of a lot of the work that goes on in the federal government, not just singling out census here, but the administrative data talk has largely been independent of these stopping rules discussions like Eli was talking about with like Cappy, how do we know when we stop in the field? Now we can use administrative data. And those have largely been independent of privacy discussions. And indeed, when you look at the white papers the Bureau puts out, or you look at the publications, or you even hear talks at all these different events that I ran through before, they are largely done by the excellent technical staffs in each of these areas in their silo, and they are operating optimally within their silos. But I would challenge that this siloed approach isn't really getting us where we need to go, because it would be great if we understood how the changes in design due to administrative data are going to impact privacy protections. It might be something very curative, because if you're using administrative data and it's all modeled, then you're not going to be potentially leaking information that a respondent provided because it was never provided in the first place. Okay, so there are lots of ways to think through this, and also the degree of imputation that you need to do. Again, it's modeled data. Is that the same as information provided from a respondent, which the letter of the law says the Bureau must protect? So it's the tensions across these different topics that I think really need to be unwound. You need to have more information being generated across these silos. And this is really needed. And I think this mirrors what we've already heard from Eli, is that the Bureau is doing all of this important work, especially for the ACS, because that's why we're here today. But they're doing all of this in this world with all of these bad things that I have. They're not all bad things. The first couple are bad. It's a constrained fiscal environment. There's a lot of technology out there that provides a threat to the data that is out there, but technology is also good on the inside of the Bureau because you've got this data lake and Sally's swimming in it and things like that. But you've got declining response rates. The good news is we have an increasingly diverse population, but that's also rough because now we have to reach them. And they all have different representatives. How do you get out there? How do you get this message out there? How do you make sure that you're not just hearing from the same people you always hear from? There are just societal shifts, especially since the pandemic, in living arrangements. It makes it hard to collect data. This is an address-based sample. You've got a lot of residential mobility. You could use administrative data perhaps to help with some of this, but the administrative data isn't reflecting everybody. Not everybody is in the tax data, is just a fact. And then ultimately the ways that you maintain confidentiality, they are constantly in flux in a good way, right? So the computer scientists and the cryptographers, they are developing newer, faster methods to protect the data. It's just that it has to be blended across those silos. And that's really, really challenging for what we see today. So we heard a lot about engagement and information flows. And I think that this is both information out of the Bureau and information into the Bureau, that window that I referred to before. But information out of the Bureau, if something's going to change, when is it going to change? What could change? Getting that information out there is necessary, but also challenging, because as soon as the Bureau says anything about what might change in ACS, like everybody jumps up with pitchforks and starts lighting their flames. So the Bureau could also do more explainers on concepts and methods. Like right now, the ACS is protected through sampling. That's great because that protects privacy somewhat. How much? Well, that would be a great explainer. The Bureau is talking about maybe not having the POMS file that we like and maybe giving synthetic data. What does that mean? Like a simple explainer, something that you would be able to have really easily explainable to a policymaker. Now I want to flip it and talk about those of us on the outside, the data users. Do you need every blessed statistic coming out of the ACS? If you know that the volume of data that they are producing is giving the Bureau heartburn, is it time to have, I know that every question has a legitimate use, but the way that that question is then spewed out to the public, is that something that is untouchable? Is there a way for the user community to say what they would be like, do some horse trading? What would you be willing to give up to have smaller margins of error? What would you be willing to give up to have the data faster or for more geographies? Okay, that's assuming not accelerating their existing schedule. That's cool. But with all the changes we're hearing about, like if that existing schedule started to slip, do some horse trading. Like what would you be willing to perhaps give on? But that can't be one directional. That can't be the users saying, oh, okay, fine, I'll take it. The Bureau has to be at that table too. And the Bureau has made it clear that they want to understand more about how the data are used. And that is great because there are constant calls for feedback and there are constant opportunities to be part of some sort of a listening group or things like that. And that is good, but there are so many users, little one-off users, so many user communities that are not part of the conversation. They are not in this room, they are not on Zoom. So how do we make sure that we are getting the information on how the data are used? And when I think about it, like this convening, which is great, I'm really happy to be here, but it's kind of like preaching to the faithful, despite the fact that there are believers out in the land that nobody has quite reached out to yet. And that when we think about how we're going to be changing products or making products for what the users need, have you heard from them? How do we do that better? And I think that that's really a responsibility of a lot of the data users to be very reflective on who are the people that I am engaged with, that I am hearing from, and who are the people that are silent to date? And how do we get out there? How do we reach out to them? And then my last slide, I was going to do it with this impossible image on the left, but I don't think that this is impossible. I think that the Bureau is going to be able to produce much more detailed information on time on the schedule that we all like. And it's going to be safe enough for the Bureau to be able to publish it, meaning it's going to follow along with the Bureau's privacy protection regulations that they are imposing on themselves. And I think that we are going to end up with something, as Rob said, and we did not plan this in advance, but that it is going to be a gem. So I had figured that I was going to end with a pun because a diamond is really hard, that it's not going to be impossible. It's really hard, but we can do it. But Rob gave us something even more aspirational, that when we do this and do it well, we are going to end up with a gem that is the ACS.
All right, thank you all very much. That was a wonderful panel. I appreciate everybody. We only have about 5 minutes for questions, so I would really like to defer to the audience first. If there are any burning questions out there, we do have a couple microphones in the room. Do we have? And there are virtual questions. Okay. All right, well, I will, taking moderator privilege, will kick off with one question that I've had on my mind for quite a while. This is a question for Sally, and it's really about the scalability of this statistical product first approach. And thinking also about what Amy said about the vast number of users, how do we envision the scalability of flipping that narrative and ensuring that we collect those products or the visions for those products equitably across a wide range of users?
So that's a great question. It's something we think about every day, actually. And part of the research that we're doing to try to determine, is there some way that we can actually segment our data users in such a way that we can be facile on how we engage and how we collect some of the purpose and use. Also, our goal is to really create a broader ecosystem. The Census Bureau cannot do this all. We need you and others playing a role in the development of products and are supporting you in that development. So those are a couple things that we're doing. And then lastly, I spent just a moment on the curated data enterprise, which is what we're calling our data enterprise, and the importance of curation and really capturing and curating all of the different steps and decisions and things that go into all of these reports that Amy can't find because we don't have them curated well, so that we can actually try to really accelerate what we're doing by not, repeating the same thing over and over again, but leveraging and using the things that we've done. So we get this continuous cycle going.
Thank you very much, Sally. All right, do we have any questions from the audience or any virtual questions?
So I'm vaguely visible here. This is going to be on some fine point, but Sally, you mentioned a collaboration with OpenAI briefly, and I was wondering if you could talk a little bit more about that. Specifically, I'm curious, we're often worried about re-identification risk as being a problem when you have anonymized microdata in combination with other publicly available data sources. And OpenAI is trained on about as much publicly available data sources as we have. And so sort of curious about privacy implications.
So our work with OpenAI and the work that we're doing on trying to better prepare the statistical products that we push out, the statistics that we push out to be consumable by AI platforms. So bear in mind that the statistical products that we push out are privacy protected. So this is not a direct access to our, confidential microdata. And so it really is an activity. And I did mention that we're in the process right now of looking at ACS and making that a priority to begin to reshape and to reshape the metadata and information that goes along with that, so that the data from the ACS will get picked up with these AI platforms and these large language models. So it's really on that uptake end, but the data that's being pulled up is our data that's already been privacy protected.
From the virtual attendees, Someone wants to know, has there ever been a specific example of ACS data reconstruction and re-identification that has harmed individuals?
I'm going to punt that question to the afternoon session. I think that Rolando and others might have something to say about that.
Do we have any other questions in the room? You guys have been very quiet. Okay, thank you.
Hi, thanks very much for the panel. Mita Anand, I'm at the Leadership Conference on Civil and Human Rights. I recognize that this might be a 1 hour long answer, but in looking at the hierarchy of administrative records and administrative data sources, commercial sources are naturally part of that. So I'd like to understand sort of what are the guardrails put around the obtaining and use of commercial data sources due to fears of encouraging bad behavior on the part of private sector actors and how they are obtaining data and using it themselves.
Yes, that's a great question. You know, we're right now in the process of dipping our toe into using administrative data for our questions and data products, and we are very aware of that potential for our commercial data sources to influence our products. So one of the things that we are planning to do, of course, as vendors potentially change, we look at how the data would change between our vendors. We also are planning to build in evaluations into the survey as we use administrative data. So for example, one of the things that's on the table is, you know, even if we remove a question from the survey or partially remove it, we would still ask that question for a subsample of the respondents so that we can continuously evaluate the administrative data that we're getting in and making sure that it is of high quality. And I'm sure there's lots of other things out there that we've looked at and other considerations, but those are the two things that come to mind.
All right, I think we can take one more question.
Good afternoon. I was delighted to hear, Sally Ann, your comments about the ecosystem and about partnerships and so on. And I'm curious what the Census Bureau is thinking of doing in terms of partnerships to advance digital equity, because I'm pleased to see major investments in broadband expansion and infrastructure. But it seems that at the moment they haven't yet been very well coordinated with the need to build digital literacy amongst less literate subpopulations.
That's a great question, and it's, you know, it's a growing challenge. We think a lot about and actually are, you know, have done some research and are characterizing sort of data acumen. We're actually using data acumen as the term as opposed to literacy a little bit here, and recognizing that we need to meet our data users where they are so that we can, and that's where having opportunities to kind of fill that space and dissemination that I talked about provides us an opportunity to think of different modalities of how our statistical products can reach our users, our stakeholders in different ways where they can actually be able to take advantage of them. In addition, you saw, I think it was Donna was sharing, you know, some of the things that are going on even with kids, and we're expanding our activities just across the board in terms of the different types of engagements on a more educational level. We have something that we're going to launch in a pilot phase this summer. We're calling it Data Camp. We have a competition going on to call it something else, but this is targeted at middle school kids, for example, to really start to learn about the types of public good statistics that the Bureau develops and how that happens, and then to expand that further. So we're doing a lot of things like that to try to reach that. And even in the space of our disclosure avoidance work around the 2020, we had some interesting engagements with different organizations and individuals that could actually put that information almost in a cartoon format for people to understand a little bit better at very basic levels what's really going on here. So it's a challenge. Partnering with you all to help on that challenge is really important, because we need to increase digital equity, data acumen across the board for the sorts of things that are going on. I'll just say one last thing. I know we're all going to lunch, and this is my cup half full comment. So I've recently come in from the academic sector as the chief scientist. And the thing that's going on out there in the universities is that and Amy can attest to this as well, every single day, every semester that students graduate, whether it's in grade school, high school, community college, graduate school, the level of data acumen of those students increases, because data science and data literacy has permeated every program that our schools produce. So that level is going up really fast. So these people, the people who are the policymakers of the future, are going to have a much higher level of data acumen than the policymakers today. And so we should be looking toward that target and aiming at that target as we're moving forward with our innovation, in my opinion.
Well, thank you, everybody. I'd like to welcome you to give our panelists a round of applause and thank them for their time today.